Grace's knees pressed into the cold marble floor, her hands raw from scrubbing, when Mrs. Kang's voice cracked through the hallway like a whip. Faster. My son's fiancé arrives in an hour, and if this floor isn't shining, you'll be sleeping on the street tonight. Grace didn't lift her head. She only smiled quietly to herself and whispered, "You have no idea who's cleaning your floor." Somewhere in a locked drawer upstairs sat a document that would change everything Mrs. Kang thought she knew, but nobody in that house had found it yet. Before we go further, comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if you love stories like this, hit subscribe because what happens next in this house is going to leave you speechless. 3 weeks earlier, Grace Adeyemi Park had a life most people only dreamed about. Penthouse views over the city, a company with her father's name still on the door, and a fiancé who looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. Michael Kang had proposed on a rooftop under string lights, and Grace had cried real tears, the kind that come from a heart that finally let itself hope. But that night, after he slipped the ring on her finger, her best friend Talia sat her down with a look that wasn't celebration. "Grace, I need you to hear me," Talia said gently, taking her hands. "Rich families test the women who marry in. They smile at dinner and pick you apart when you leave the room. You won't see it coming until it's already happened." Grace laughed it off, squeezing her friend's hand. "Michael's not like that. His family will love me." Talia didn't argue. She just held her friend a little tighter because she'd seen this story before, and it never ended the way the bride expected. 2 weeks later, Grace arrived early for a family dinner at the Kang estate, eager to surprise Michael. She let herself in through the side door, the way his mother always insisted family should, and that's when she heard it. Mrs. Kang's voice, low and sharp, drifting from the study. "She's not the one I would have chosen for him. Let's see what she's really made of before this wedding happens." Grace froze in the hallway, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed her hand to her mouth, not from fear, but from the sting of betrayal creeping up her throat. That single sentence rewrote everything she thought she understood about the woman who was about to become her mother-in-law. She didn't tell Michael. Instead, she called Talia that night, pacing her kitchen barefoot, phone pressed to her ear. "I need to see them when they don't know I'm watching," Grace said, her voice shaking with something between hurt and determination. "I need to know if they'll ever really accept me, or if this whole engagement is a performance." Talia went quiet for a moment, then asked carefully, "Grace, what are you thinking?" Grace looked at her reflection in the dark window and said the words slowly, like she was testing how they felt in her mouth. "I'm going to become their maid." Talia nearly dropped the phone. "Grace, if this goes wrong, you could lose more than a wedding. You could lose him." Grace's voice softened, but it didn't waver. "Then I need to know now, before I lose myself trying to make them love me." The plan came together faster than either of them expected. Talia knew a staffing agency that placed temporary household help for wealthy families, the kind that never asked too many questions if the paperwork looked clean. Grace pulled her hair back, wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that whispered money, and gave her name as Grace Johnson. When she walked through the Kang estate staff entrance 3 days later, her heart was pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Michael was away on a business trip in Singapore, unreachable for the next 10 days. It was the only window she had. Mrs. Kang barely looked at her the first morning, waving a hand toward a mountain of laundry and snapping orders without ever meeting her eyes. But Susie, Michael's younger sister, was different. She found Grace scrubbing the kitchen counter and quietly set a glass of water beside her. "You looked thirsty," Susie said softly, "and nobody around here ever asks if you're okay, so I figured I would." Grace looked up, surprised by the warmth in a house that had felt so cold. "Thank you," she whispered, and something in Susie's eyes told her this young woman was carrying her own quiet storm, one Grace hadn't expected to find. By the end of the first week, Grace noticed something strange. There was a room upstairs, always locked, and every time she came near it with her cleaning cart, one of the house staff would appear out of nowhere and redirect her. "Not that room," an older housekeeper murmured one afternoon, ushering her away with a nervous glance over her shoulder. "Nobody goes in there." Not even the family, unless Mrs. Kang says so. Grace's curiosity burned brighter than her exhaustion. One evening, passing by with a stack of towels, she saw the door crack open just slightly. Inside, she caught a glimpse of moving boxes, folders spilling papers onto the floor, and Mrs. Kang standing over them with an expression Grace had never seen on her before. Not anger. Fear. The door slammed shut before Grace could see anything else, and she stood frozen in the hallway, her pulse racing. Whatever was behind that door, it terrified the most powerful woman in the house, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that her entire future was locked inside it. That night, Grace lay awake in the small staff quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mrs. Kang's face over and over in her mind. Fear like that didn't come from nowhere. It came from something buried, something the family was desperate to keep hidden from the world, and maybe even from each other. She thought about Michael, about the way he held her hand at dinner and promised her forever, and she wondered how much of what she loved about this family was real, and how much was a mask slowly starting to crack. Somewhere in that mansion was a truth waiting to be found, and Grace had a feeling that once she found it, there would be no going back to the life she thought she was building. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easy, because deep down, she already knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Grace was assigned to dust the study, the very room where she'd first overheard Mrs. Kang's cruel words about her. She moved slowly between the shelves, careful and quiet, until her eyes landed on a folder half-tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that. But her fingers moved before her mind could stop them, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Overdue notices. A second mortgage taken out against the estate. A loan document with a signature that didn't match Michael's father at all. Grace sat frozen on the edge of the desk, her breath shallow, piecing together a truth no one was supposed to find. The Kang family, the same family that looked down on her, that whispered about her worth behind closed doors, was quietly drowning in debt. She thought she'd found her answer. She was only scratching the surface. Later that night, while polishing silverware in the hallway outside the study, Grace heard Mrs. Kang's voice again, this time on the phone, sharper and colder than before. Once the wedding happens and her money is tied to this family, we won't need her opinion on anything. We'll have what we need. Grace's hands stilled over the silver in her lap. She had prepared herself for coldness. She had prepared herself for judgment. She had not prepared for this, for the confirmation that the woman who was supposed to become her family saw her only as a transaction waiting to close. Her chest ached in a way she hadn't expected, not anger first, but grief. Grief for the mother-in-law she had hoped for and would never have. A few days later, everything shifted when Michael came home early from his trip, his suitcase still in hand, his tie loosened from the long flight. Grace was in the hallway carrying a tray when he walked right past her, exhaustion written across his face. "You there," he said without even glancing up. "Can you bring coffee to my office? Black, no sugar." Grace's whole body went still. This was the man who had proposed to her under string lights, who had memorized how she liked her tea, who once said he'd know her anywhere. And now he was looking straight through her like she was furniture. She swallowed hard and answered in a voice she barely recognized as her own. "Right away, sir." As she turned to walk away, her eyes stung, not because he hadn't recognized her face, but because of what his blindness revealed about how easily people who serve him became invisible. In that one moment, she learned something about him no engagement ring could have told her, and she wasn't sure yet what she was going to do with that knowledge. If you're feeling everything Grace is feeling right now, drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in her shoes. And if this story has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because what happens in the next scene is going to change everything. 2 days after Michael's return, tension in the house grew heavier, like a storm building just behind the walls. Mrs. Kang seemed to sense that something was different, that the quiet maid moving through her home noticed too much, stayed too long near closed doors. So she decided to remove the problem herself. During afternoon tea in the parlor, Mrs. Kang gasped dramatically, clutching her wrist. "My diamond bracelet, it's gone. It was on this table not 10 minutes ago." Her eyes swept the room and landed directly on Grace, who stood near the doorway with a tray in her hands. "Search her," Mrs. Kang said coldly, loud enough for the other staff to hear. "She's the only one who's been in this room all day." Grace's heart pounded as two staff members hesitantly approached her, and she realized, with a chill running down her spine, that she was seconds away from being thrown out of the very house she was destined to inherit. But she wasn't going to let it end like this. Before anyone could touch her, Susie stepped between them, her voice trembling but firm. "Stop. Everyone, just stop." She turned to her mother, eyes glistening with something between fear and defiance. "Mom, I saw you move that bracelet into your jewelry box myself this morning. Why are you doing this to her?" The room fell painfully silent. Mrs. Kang's face flushed, caught in her own trap, and for the first time, she had no sharp words ready. Susie gently pulled Grace aside into the hallway, her hands shaking as she held onto her sleeve. "There was another woman before you," Susie whispered, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Someone Michael almost married years ago." She started asking questions too, about money, about this family, and then one day she was just gone. Nobody talks about her. Nobody explains what happened. Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Gone how?" she asked, barely able to speak the words. Susie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. And that's what scares me the most." The truth about what really happened to that woman would leave everyone speechless, and Grace suddenly understood that she wasn't just fighting for her own future. She was standing in the footsteps of someone who never got the chance to fight for hers. That night, Grace sat alone in the small staff quarters, Susie's words echoing in her mind, and for the first time since she'd started this dangerous game, fear crept in where determination used to be. She thought about walking away, about calling Talia and ending it all before it went further. But then she thought about the fear on Mrs. Kang's face outside that locked room, the debt hidden in the study, the vanished woman nobody dared mention, and she knew she couldn't stop now, not when she was this close to the truth. She reached for her phone, dialed Talia's number with trembling fingers, and whispered into the receiver, "I think I finally understand what I'm really up against." On the other end, Talia's voice was steady, grounding her. "Then it's time to stop hiding, Grace. It's time to show them exactly who you are." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her like armor. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. She just didn't know yet how far the Kang family would go to stop her. The next morning, Grace woke before sunrise, her decision already settled deep in her chest. She showered, pulled her hair back the way she used to before board meetings, and dialed her lawyer, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. "I need the estate documents ready by noon," she said. "All of them. And I need you at the Kang house by 1 o'clock. By the time she hung up, her hands had stopped shaking. She was done hiding in someone else's house, wearing someone else's fear. At exactly 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang at the Kang estate, and Susie answered it, her eyes widening at the sight before her. Grace stood on the porch, but not the Grace who had scrubbed their floors for 2 weeks. Her hair was down, her posture straight, wearing a simple cream dress that carried more quiet power than any diamond ever could. Beside her stood her lawyer, a leather folder tucked under his arm. "Susie," Grace said gently, "I need to speak with your mother and Michael. All of them, together, now." Susie's mouth opened, then closed again, and she simply nodded, stepping aside to let her in. Mrs. Kang was in the middle of arranging flowers in the dining room when Grace walked in, and the vase nearly slipped from her hands. "You," she breathed, recognition and confusion colliding across her face. Michael appeared from the hallway a moment later, stopping dead in his tracks. "Grace? What's going on? Why are you?" His voice trailed off as his eyes moved from her face to the woman standing beside her, then back again, pieces slowly clicking into place. "Wait. The maid. Grace Johnson. That was you." Grace nodded slowly, her voice steady despite the ache still living in her chest. "That was me, Michael. For 2 weeks, I was the maid your mother threatened to throw onto the street. I was the woman you asked to bring you coffee without ever looking at my face." The room went silent, thick with the kind of tension that makes the air feel heavier. Grace turned to Mrs. Kang, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this house, she let every ounce of hurt rise to the surface. "I heard you on the phone twice. I heard you say you'd chosen someone else for your son. I heard you say once the wedding happened and my money was tied to this family, you wouldn't need me anymore." Mrs. Kang's face drained of color, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Grace continued, quieter now, but no less powerful. "I also found the loan documents in the study. I know about the second mortgage. I know this family has been drowning, and I know exactly why you needed this wedding so badly." Michael took a step forward, his voice breaking. "Grace, please, let me explain," but Grace held up a hand, not unkindly, but firmly. "I'm not finished." She nodded to her lawyer, who opened the leather folder and laid a single document on the dining table. "This house," Grace said, her eyes never leaving Mrs. Kang's face, "was purchased 11 years ago by my father as a long-term investment property. He passed away before he ever sold it, and I inherited it along with everything else he built. You have been living in a home that was never fully yours to threaten me out of." Mrs. Kang sank slowly into a chair, her hand pressed to her chest, the weight of the truth crushing whatever pride she had left. The silence that followed felt endless, until Grace finally spoke the words that had been building inside her for 2 long weeks. "I didn't need to test your money. I needed to test your hearts. And you failed, every single one of you except one." She turned towards Susie, whose eyes were already filled with tears. "You were kind to me when you thought I had nothing to offer you. You warned me about a woman before me who deserved to be protected and wasn't. That matters more than you know." Susie stepped forward and hugged her tightly, whispering a shaky thank you into her shoulder. If this moment is hitting you right in the heart, this is exactly the time to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me if you saw this coming, because we are almost at the ending, and it is going to leave you speechless. Michael reached for Grace's hand, his eyes desperate. "Please don't do this. I love you. I didn't know any of this was happening." Grace looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the man she had fallen for under those string lights. "I believe you didn't know," she said softly. "But loving someone means seeing them, even when they're wearing a uniform and carrying your coffee. And you didn't see me, Michael. Not once." She slipped the engagement ring from her finger and placed it gently into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this out of respect for myself." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "The house isn't going anywhere. I won't throw your family out onto the street the way your mother threatened to do to me. But this engagement ends today." A few months later, Grace stood in a bright new office space, watching a group of young women practice interview skills for hospitality positions, several of them former household staff who had once worked for families just like the Kangs. Susie walked in beside her, now running the mentorship division of Grace's growing foundation, her laughter easy and free in a way it never was inside her mother's house. Grace looked at a photo of her father on her desk and smiled softly. She never needed a title to know her worth. She only needed to see the truth, and once she saw it clearly, nothing could ever dim her light again. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that character is never revealed in how people treat you when they need something from you, but in how they treat you when they believe you have nothing to offer at all. If someone shows you who they are when they think no one is watching, believe them the first time. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Grace, would you have forgiven Michael or walked away exactly like she did? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, share this story with a friend who needs to hear it today, and if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story. We have so many more waiting for you right here on the channel.